Good morning, everybody. It's another adventure with Southern Shadows and Dust, where we're trying to preserve some of the history and heritage of the Southwest Alabama, Northwest Florida region. I've got with me today Marietta.
Hey.
Hey, how are you doing today?
I'm fine.
All right, and tell us about Bowman Cemetery in this part too. I did a little bit last week, but you're you're kind of the caretaker of the cemetery, so tell us what we got here. I'm gonna get this mic close to you. So.
Okay. I'm the great granddaughter of John Moy that's buried out there in the middle of the cemetery. And at one time there was a building over the top of him, but through time and years of neglect, it's kind of fell down. So we took and cleaned it up. But through the years, way back when we were all using hose and slings to clean the cemetery, there was one man that used to maintain it pretty well when he could. I don't know his name, and it was actually back through the years. It's been owned by the Horns. Well, my mother inherited it for about 5 years through some circumstances, and I inherited it in 2013 when my mother died, and we've been trying to maintain this, keep it back up, not let it go to waste, and grow up. We've had a couple community cleanups. We've advertised it in the papers. Kevin's been real good to help us with that and get it out when we do. And since from that, we've had quite a few that realize the cemetery is here, and they are helping. I can't name names. I don't always see who, but I come through, and the cemetery is being cleaned. We just different ones come out from time to time and cut. And if you can't cut and want to make a donation, I have an email that we can give you, and you can contact me. And I know we've had some ladies out of Pensacola area that couldn't come, and they've made some donations, and that helps to do with round up and keep up and what we have to do back here. So
what's that email address?
It's marietta.johnson1964@gmail.com. I can't even talk this morning. And I have it here. If somebody is interested and want to make a donation, we'd be more than glad to have y'all come help our work. And money helps with like I say, with the roundup, things like that.
Yeah. Well, let's walk around a little bit, and
Right.
Any graves that are kind of points of interest to you.
I have to be, kind of partial. I have the guide ones, which is where I come through, back here in the back. My mother has two sisters buried here in this cemetery.
What are their names?
Lottie is one, and the other one I do not know. They're just, one was an infant and one only lived a year. She has uncles and all kinds of family back here. And a lot of the graves in the cemetery, you'll find some of them we have no dates. We don't know. They're just iron rocks or just a little mound that we know is there, or a slab that's no name, no nothing. So, but this area here is some of the guide ones and Moys, and I'm sure Kevin will take a picture of the John Moy, which is the one we were talking about earlier. So it's just
Now that's Thomas Randolph Moy.
yeah,
so
that would have been
74 to 19.
John's brother, if I'm not mistaken.
He died relatively young. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know what happened to him? Or
No,
anything?
I do not know. A lot of diseases and stuff happened back then. And
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yellow fever swept through this area several times, and typhus. And now this is the John Moy here that had the
little building above it at one time.
And do you know the story? My dad tells it about the panther that comes through.
I've heard that when the shed was here, that there was a panther that came through this area, and quite a few people have seen him. And he would lay under the building here and on this grave during the night, which I'm assuming it was warmer during the winter, so it kept him a nicer place to sleep.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, my dad said that when that panther would come through, because Cowpen Creek is down about probably a mile down there, that when that panther would come through in the spring and in the fall, that all the livestock would come up out of the pasture at night and get in the barn, like they knew something big was moving along that creek bank.
Well, if you've ever been in the woods out there and had one of them squall, your hair stands up, and you even if you don't hear them, sometimes you just get the feeling, and there's something there. You know it.
Yeah, you'd head for the barn too if you were in the. Yeah, that's the story he tells, and What about the? You were saying that there's blacks buried outside of the cemetery.
Around the edge, I was told that there used to be a fence, and it had grown up and fell down so bad till we wound up taking the fence down. And but we understood that the blacks were buried on the outside of the fence, as such in some of the grave cemeteries as in Pollard. So.
Yeah. So they were any exact where at or.
I know there were some supposedly on the sides, but it's so long grown.
Yeah. Well, and do you know of any headstones outside
No,
of the area?
We haven't found any headstones. Most of those were probably wood crosses that's on there.
Well, what about sawdust piles? Have you found much of that?
Well, you find mounds around here, and you're really not sure if it was sawdust or where in time maybe they logged and it pushed it up.
Well, the big story from R.W. Brooks that we were looking at a minute ago was from 1929 in the Flamanton paper, and he said in there that 60 years before that, the largest settlement in Escambia County at the time was Evansville, and in 1929 it was just a pile of sawdust by the railroad. But it's been said that where the cemetery is, that's the approximate location of the mill that Holder Evans built, and Evans came out down from Butler County and built this big mill. His son went to the Naval Academy, and anyway, the mill burned in the late 1860s, and then there was a earthquake in South Carolina that the repercussions of that was such that it closed the spring, and there was no fresh water here anymore after the fire, and a lot of people moved to canoe that came after that.
Yeah.
And he was a boy clerk at the commissary, and he could also read and write, so he kept a really good take on what went on here over the years.
Well, these graves down here, Kevin, when we did one of the and you helped us with it, was advertising that we were doing a cleanup. The ladies came from Pensacola, and that we found out these 5 graves were actually some of her ancestors back when, like we talked about, they didn't make it, the different diseases that come around, but that we had no idea who they belonged to. But she was some Godwin kin, and she had come up to help with the cemetery. All she could do was make a donation. They were elderly ladies, but then we found out this was some of the Godwin descendants.
Were these children in these smaller graves?
Yeah, all 5 infants.
Did they know what happened to them, or?
Not really sure. It was before her time, but they had some of the diseases that came around, and it would always hit just as they were having children. So
well, and sometimes things that we would now call, what is it, the cribs death?
Yeah, crib death.
Yeah, that would have been something that a lot of these cemeteries, you see a lot of child graves, and it's really sad because they didn't get a chance to live their life or do any of the other things that we take for granted every day. And what about ghost stories? You heard much about those over the years?
Yeah, there's quite a few. There's a story of there's a house cat that's down here, and he's very friendly, and you can pick him up and tote him around. But just as you start out to what used to be up where my Jeep's at area, the gate, they say this cat goes ballistic, and he will scratch you, and he takes off back to the cemetery, and he's gone.
Wow, I hadn't heard that one.
Yeah, there's one there.
Well, and is there another one about isn't there an orb or something that floats around?
There's some orbs around here, and I've had people to tell me on this John Moy, they've seen this man over here standing at this tree leaning up. Well, they said he used to lean up on that building, and some of the ancestors had pictures, so the people that had told me they had seen him, I just took them that picture, and when they looked at it, they said, that's the man, he's standing there in the overalls. So apparently that John Moy is still here. His wife is buried at Travelers Rest Cemetery, and I haven't found out why. I plan on trying to find out. I found out the other week at the SCV meeting that I went to. They had a historical meeting on it and ancestry and how to do, and that was one of the things. Some things they give us some information. So, if you're not an SCV member, but even when they have things like that, they're glad to have others come in, and you can learn a lot.
Yeah, the genealogy workshop, and like Sherry Johnson brought in those, and Don Sales and Jerry Fisher was there too. Sherry Johnson had these websites, and I do a lot of this. I'm certainly no expert, but she had a list of people that come over on, landed at Ellis Island. Of course, that would have been in the 20th century, but she had a lot of different record locations that I didn't know about. That's why it's good to get together and talk shop, and figure that out. And a lot of times too, it's like you said, the mystery of why she's buried at Traveler's Rest, which is across the creek, and why he's buried over here. And sometimes old newspapers are help with that, but they're not always guaranteed, you know.
Well, maybe that'll be another edition later.
It could be a good thing to look up and try to track that mystery. So there's orbs, and there's a cat, and then there's possibly John Moy.
Out here. That's what the people have said.
Well, there's the other story that's told that's kind of like a lot more of an urban legend, but about the guys on the way to the dance. You remember that one? Hearing that one? Well, it's highly urban legend, but you know it's interesting to recount. But they were going to a dance, and they met a girl out here, not at Bowman, but on the highway, and they took her with them to the dance, and they danced with her, and she was cold. One of them gave her his jacket, and he realized when he got home that he had left his jacket with her, and he knew his dad was going to be all over him, so he went back looking for it the next day, and went to every house in Wawbeek and couldn't locate that jacket, and finally went to a house where a little old lady was there and said, well, the person you described was my daughter, but she was hit by a train while walking to a dance 20 years ago, and he thought she must be crazy, but she told him where the grave was, and he came out here and found the jacket hanging on the headstone. But now I will say this: every community has that story in one form or the other. So that one's probably not as the veracity of that may not be as great as the story about the cat and the other. The cat really interests me. I need to come back out here and try to find that.
Well, and in the cemetery from here, there's probably about 500 feet over to the railroad track. So it was well known that people walked the tracks years ago, and a lot of times they didn't pay attention, or for whatever reason they did get killed by the trains and things like that. So
you know, it's fun telling those ghost stories, so that one may or may not be the most truthful one, but you know, another story that R.W. Brooks writes about, apparently at the end of this road was the commissary. End of this dirt road that hits 31 was where the commissary for the Holder Evans Mill was, and he was the boy clerk there. Well, he talks about one day in that late 1860s, they were tearing up the culvert out here, and the railroad train comes along, and somebody didn't let the conductor know, and when he figured it out, he hit the brakes, but by the time he hit the brakes, it was too late, and the train derailed. Well, it just so happened it was a circus train, and when it derailed, all these animals, all these wild animals, leopards and
exotic animals,
were roaming the woods, and he said the last car contained the lady that was over the circus, and he said she came out, and he said he had never heard a woman curse like she did. So he said, I think the exact words was, she cursed everyone from the president of the railroad company right down to the workers on the side of the railroad. But I don't know how or when they rounded up all of those animals, but that was around the late 1860s. And I looked up that circus, which I can't remember the name of it right now, but I'll try to insert that in the comments or something. But it was a well-known circus, and it was a circus that started the process. They were known for the first railroad circus that transported their animals and performers by railroad. So it's a neat thing. But I wanted to thank you for coming.